hosting us here today. Really, the efforts that APS is making in bringing national security conversations around the country, I think, are some of the most important things that will happen, that we'll see happening in the run-up to the election. These are conversations that have to happen because the American public needs to talk about, we need to hear from the candidates about these issues. We're not talking about them enough. And I'm not going to take any more time. I'm going to jump into things with you. You had a terrific piece that was on CNN.com that laid out some of your foreign policy priorities. What was interesting to me was the order in which you laid them out, because I know you're a fiscal hawk, but you put the budget first, before defense spending, before ISIS, before China. Why is that?
Well, if we don't have a strong economy, all is lost. So you want to make sure that you have economic growth, because that's an element, I think you would agree with this, it's an element of foreign policy. If we can't seem to get anything done here, if we have a weak economy, if you take a look at China and their infrastructure bank, of course we don't know where China is today, but at the time they were using their infrastructure bank to drive themselves into the sphere of influence. So I think a strong economy is critical, but there are some fundamental things, of course, that the federal government needs to do, and one of them is to provide for the common defense. And we have allowed, my view is we've allowed the Pentagon and our definitive needs in defense to be eroded over time. So I would say that there are kind of two things we need to do. One is, I don't know how much you've studied the Pentagon, but it is a place that is tangled up with bureaucracy and red tape, and it's often difficult to get systems researched and developed and then deployed within a reasonable period of time. I mean, any business person sitting out here would have said they had enough of that and they need to get it fixed. And you saw it happen with the vehicle that was produced to fight against those bombs that were on the side of the road. Better known name was IEDs. And it was a crash program. We need a lot of crash programs in the Pentagon. We have somewhere around 900,000, according to one of the reports, of people in that building who are involved one way or another in procurement. And as you know, if you have that many people, you don't have responsibility, you have a lot of inefficiency. But that in mind, we definitely need to rebuild our defenses, and look, it's a top priority. So, for example, there is Congress couldn't get its act together. They couldn't agree on anything, so they passed these restraints on spending and sequester, I think they call it. If I were president, that would not in any way impact my priority needs to rebuild the national security of this country. The fact is that Congress just can't seem to get us on the glide path to a balanced budget. When we had one, when I left Washington, because I was budget chairman, we had a $5 trillion surplus, which they blew. And it put them in this murky world now of not being able to reach agreement and not being able to balance budgets, and then we have a sequester problem with the Pentagon. Get rid of that. You cannot let those kinds of things get in the way of building a strong national defense. And I think that's where Senator McCain is, and that's where I am. We don't want to waste money in the Pentagon. We want to reform that system. But Americans have the strongest defense in the world, which we currently do, but it has to constantly be upgraded.
Well, we're talking about defense, and we're talking about defense coverage. Of course, the biggest problem that we have is not defense spending, it's entitlements and entitlement growth. And the two are in opposition. So the sequester, which the governor was referring to, is a $500 billion cut in defense spending and a $500 billion cut on the domestic side, on the entitlement side as well. How do we work this out? There are some who have suggested over in recent years that we don't have the money. It's not that we don't have that we need the reform necessarily, but that we don't have the money to spend on reinvesting in the defense budget.
Well, you can't take that approach because national security and common defense is one of the essential features of the federal government. Look, if I were president, I would do what I've done so many times, and that is to put together a budget that over time would take us to balance and be able to produce some surpluses and have national security as one of our highest priorities. It's not that hard to decide which you think are your highest priorities, then drive the system to get there. And I'll give you for example. When I was the chief architect of the '97 agreement, we not only had a balanced budget, but we cut taxes, and the economy was growing, by leaps and bounds. And to get to a balanced budget, you need to reform, innovate, change the operation of government, while at the same time being able to have economic growth. The two come together to give you a balance and a surplus, and then you begin to take control of your economic future. I mean, we can get, this is not a session today on economics, and we should start doing those as well. It's the lack of will on the part of members who were elected to get us a roadmap towards a balanced budget. But that should not preclude the ability to innovate and reform entitlements. I'll give you an example. In my state, Medicaid, when I came in, was growing at 10%, and in my second budget, it was growing at 2%, and no one went off the rolls, and we didn't cut any benefits. We managed it. You can manage these things. This is not that difficult. Politically, it's difficult. Public policy-wise, it's very achievable. Then when I became governor of Ohio, we were almost 20% of our operating budget in the hole, sort of like what Rick Snyder had here, and now we're running a $2 billion surplus. So, you know, it's a matter of creating priorities, and which will give you some economic growth at the same time you have a legitimate roadmap, and then you fund the things that are critical to you. It's not that, I don't think people in Washington think it's so difficult. It's not that hard. It's just taking this government and making it work. But you can't pay attention to politics, though. You know, if you're going to have people yelling and screaming and saying, don't touch my program, you'll never get there. But if you can pull together people who put the country first and understand the dynamics of a growing economy and creating priorities, you get it done. And I don't mean you. I'm sure you got it. Here at ABI, it's a great institution. You understand how this all fits together.
I don't have all of the answers either, I'm afraid, but I want to ask you about some of the priorities. We talk about resourcing the defense budget. We talk about reinvesting in national security, something that I think people don't understand. All of the money that has gone into defense budget has been for more fighting. It hasn't been for buying better equipment. It hasn't been for investing in the infrastructure that makes our military strong. But you've talked about some of your priorities, and you seem to spend a lot of emphasis on the Navy. Why is that? Most of our fighting has been done over the last decade with the Army.
Well, because, I mean, first of all, we're reducing the Army too far. And we just had General Cordiono, who's now retiring, saying, you know, we have to be at least 500,000, maybe 450 to 500 would be. I don't want to get into all the numbers, because what you really want to do is sit around the table with your experts, both military and non-military, who have national security experience, and look real carefully at the threat and what the resources you have and how you apply them appropriately. And they will be over time. It can't be done overnight. But I believe in the military that can project power, a military that is mobile and lethal. And if you notice, people here notice over time, we have to get places where we need to get to quickly, and when we're there, we have to have the capability to be able to do the job. Now, we've invested some of our time in nation building, which I don't believe in. I mean, I don't think it ought to be a priority in the United States to get everybody on the globe to operate exactly the way we do. I mean, there are people that we look at and they do things that we don't like it, but we have similar goals. We don't need to spend our resources trying to get them to become like us. But our ability to get places. Now, we have the F-35, you know, going into production. Part of the problem there is it a stable design? There's some controversy around it, but we're going to go with that system. The Army cannot shrink below where it is now. And, you know, I'd like to get it to 450 up to 500. And, you know, so we've got to be involved in cybersecurity. And we need to have a policy that not only allows us to be on the defense, but to make it clear to people who think about hacking our systems that we also have the capability to go on the offense. But we don't have a clear policy on cybersecurity. So the challenge with the military right now is there's so many different things that need to be done. Our intelligence capability, as you know, having served on the Intelligence Committee, we need to have an aggressive head of our intelligence operations. We need better intelligence on the ground, which gets to the issue of human intelligence. Mike Rogers, I know, feels strongly about this. So it's economic, it's intelligence, and it's also a strong military that's lethal and is mobile.
There are lots of things I want to ask you.
Well, you asked about the Navy. We need carriers. We need to be able to project power in the oceans. We know about China want to take over the South China Sea. That's a no-no. We need to be able to be clear in what we say. That means you have to do things, not just say things. But it's not just one. It's all the services are going to need to be refurbished, and there's a giant requirement here.
So back 7 years ago when you were in Congress, you opposed the additional spending on the B-2 bomber.
Mhm.
B-2 bomber is a pretty proven piece of equipment. It's what we would use were we to need to go into military action with Iran. It is what we do use already in a variety of different theaters. Looking back, do you think that you did the right thing?
No, thank goodness we stopped at 20, and that was an agreement that I reached with people in the Pentagon. And what I wanted to do with that system was like about $1 billion a copy. And so its fundamental mission, when it first presented to me, was to fly inside the Soviet Union in the middle of a nuclear war and drop more nuclear weapons. And I kind of thought, well, I mean, how many do you need to drop? So what I wanted to do, in order to have a clear victory, I have to finish my sentences because sometimes when I tell people take that context. But what I wanted to do with those systems is I wanted to develop standoff weapons that you could fire at great distance with incredible accuracy that didn't put the pilot at risk and still accomplish the mission. Now, you obviously have to have a bomber force, and we have one. And we ended up building 20 of them, and every time it was revisited, it stayed at 20. I mean, we're going to build 132. I originally proposed 13, and a coalition of both conservatives, moderates, and liberals got together, and we kept up the battle, and at the end of the day, we built 20, and I think that's the adequate force. But I also believe the ability to be able to project at great distances without having to put your people at risk is a great approach, which we've used effectively and should continue.
And the military wants to buy more of those bombers now, not have fewer.
Well, what we have to do is we have to figure out, in terms of the risks, we have to figure out what that risk is, what our resources are, realizing we're going to have to put the resources in. But having served on the Defense Committee for 18 years, and then listened to a lot of people, you know, I mean, there was a time when the military really was in strong opposition to the Goldwater-Nichols bill. A proposal to get the services to work together, to fight together, to train together. Now, it's probably been overdone now with the pendulum swinging way too high, but they were opposed to that at the time. You know, they were never big fans in the early days of the Special Forces. It was not something that they really wanted to invest a lot in. So you have to listen to what the military says, but you also have to have people in the military who sort of sees things in different ways, and based on 21st century, because you've got to make sure that everybody has their own special biases. You just got to make sure that you are actually funding the priority and not what somebody thinks is their most important priority. That's about judgment. It's about good advice and good advisors.
Okay, well, I'm going to let the audience worry about some of the inconsistencies.
That clock, is that all we have? Oh, I see. Okay.
We have to get
I thought
everybody.
in the NBA, that shot clock.
All right, then we'll keep shooting. I'm going to let the audience judge some of the inconsistencies in what you just said to me about the B-2 and about reinvesting in the military, because I want to ask you about cyber. This is an interesting issue, and you said that you position yourself somewhere between Rand Paul and Chris Christie. Sorry, I noticed that. On these cyber questions, there's no question we've all heard about all the hacks, we've heard about the OPM, 25 million different files on Americans' information, but there is a balance, obviously, with liberty, with privacy, and for private business as well. Where do you stand on that?
Well, cybersecurity, that is a different issue than the issue of government access to data. What I've said is that I think it is really important, in most cases, that there is a balance between national security and personal liberty. And on that basis, I've always felt that when they need to access something, we need to have a court that can operate in an expedited manner. But obviously, in a crisis situation, something that's, you know, Jack Bauer at 24, you know, we're going to have to operate just as quickly as we need to. But I think there is.
Do you support the metadata gathering or not?
Yeah, I do, but I don't like it. I didn't ever like it being held in the NSA, and I don't like it being gathered without some sense of why you're gathering.
You don't want to hold it OPM then?
Well, what I really thought about initially was that perhaps some sort of a quasi organization. Now it's in the hands of the telecoms, and it's a lot better than being in the hands of the government. We're suspicious of the government in a lot of ways. I think they don't handle things as well a lot of the time. I think that applies to this as well. And so I think that there's a balance there that can be achieved. And Congress has moved in the right direction on this. I think they've achieve something that's pretty good, and we'll see how it works.
Let's jump ahead to 2017.
And cybersecurity is a whole other issue.
So let's talk about that.
That's the hacking issue. And I think part of the problem there is we don't, NSA has a lot of great, National Security Agency has a lot of great capability. But the situation with the National Security Agency is that we don't have a very good policy in terms of how to respond whenever we do get hacked.
So how would you respond? If you would have been president?
Oh, I think we need to make it clear to those people who hack, whether it's in the Chinese government or not, that we not only have offensive capability, or defensive capability, but we have offensive capability to deal with your systems, all through electronic signals and our ability to take aggressive action. And I think it needs to be spelled out internally. I don't think we need to go out and broadcast it to the world, but I think we need to have an aggressive policy and a clear policy as it relates to this issue.
So you do believe that we should undertake offensive actions and retaliation?
In some cases, I think, yes, it's necessary.
Got it. Let's switch to some of the other challenges that we
Because
face.
you know what, it's like what Reagan said, a strong defense, is, that's the best way to keep the peace. If they know that we have the capability, if they know we use it, we probably will see less action.
Well, but of course they don't think that we're going to use it.
That's why we have to have a policy and make it clear to them. So that's maybe not what a president does, maybe, but it's also what the people who work for the president do. They communicate clearly to people who engage in this that this is what the ramifications can be if you continue to do what you do. On all these issues, you have to be cool as a cucumber. You don't get all worked up or get emotional. You stay cool as a cucumber and execute your policy in the most effective way.
Some of the candidates have suggested that while a lot of the conversation that we have nationally about national security issues relates to terrorism, groups like ISIS, things like that, that in fact the real threat that we face, the bigger likelihood of conflict is with the People's Republic of China. You mentioned what's going on in the South China Sea. What do you think we ought to be doing about that?
Well, I think we moved the carrier force through there when they were threatening Taiwan. I've suggested that, but I'm happy to see that there are now some joint exercises going on with our friends in Asia, and I think that equally sends a message. When you look at the Chinese today, my approach to China is that we shouldn't be looking at them with rose-colored glasses. I mean, we don't need to view them as an enemy, but certainly not as an ally. I think it's a balance. Most things in life are a balance until you see something like, the Russian invasion of Ukraine where there is no balance. That's pure aggression on their part. But in terms of the Chinese, you see what the problem is right now. I mean, nobody can quite figure what's happening, but they have manipulated the economy for so long. The manipulation of the economy can only work for so long. And now President Xi is somewhat under attack for, sort of mandating things that you can't carry out. In other words, you can't repeal gravity, and I think that's what the Chinese are experiencing. So for me, I think that the president did talk about pivot to Asia. I think it was important. They didn't do anything about it. So I think it's important that we project power, and we can do it in a variety of ways, whether it's through whether it's through a carrier task force, whether it is through the military exercises we're doing with our friends there. I think that sends strong messages to the Chinese. And beyond that, I don't think we should continue to let them take advantage of all our intellectual property either. They should have an end to that as well.
One of the things you've talked about in other forums is on the question of ISIS.
Yeah, one other thing there.
Yeah,
That's trade. Yeah. I think it is important that we have a trade agreement with our friends in the Pacific. But I will tell you this, I think, and we're in Detroit today, I think it is important that when we have free trade agreements and countries violate them by dumping their products and trying to destroy our workers' jobs, that we take expedited actions against them. I think that the United States having a process of like 2 years to figure out whether somebody is dumping stuff into our country and workers would lose their jobs, and then 2 years later we go, okay, well, you were wrong, now what? So I think free trade, but also an aggressive trade situation where we don't allow them to do things that violate the agreement.
Let's jump over to Syria. What would you be doing? You talked about boots on the ground fighting ISIS.
I think we should have been there. Look, I called John McCain, John Boehner, I don't know, a year and a half or even 2 years ago now, time flies. I believe we really should have been supporting these opposition groups in Syria from the very beginning. And now it's become somewhat more confused in determining who our allies are, who our friends are, I mean allies, but who we have common interests in as opposed to those who don't. we see the agreement that we've reached in Turkey to be able to fly our planes out of Turkey. And now we're operating in a never-never land again without clear lines, because we're not sure the Turks are actually over there helping us with the anti-ISIS forces, or whether they're spending their time bombing the Kurds. So that was another strategic error. The EU, European Union, did not let the Turks join the European Union, which would have brought them closer into our orbit, which I think would have made total sense. But Assad has to go. I mean, it simply has to go, and we ought to be supporting the groups that we can align ourselves with, and if it means boots on the look. ISIS is an attack on Western civilization. It's not just something we're witnessing, in one part of the world now. Them and groups like them represent an attack on who we are as people. And I've argued for a long time on this, that we should have, in a coalition with our allies, which we've allowed those relationships to erode as well, right? You have a bunch of people in a magazine murdered in Paris, and they have 1 million people in the streets, and we don't send anybody. I mean, those relationships with our allies, NATO itself, needs to be strengthened. Not only strengthened militarily, but I'm a believer that personal relationships do make a difference, particularly on margin. So anyway, I believe we should be there in a coalition, and I think we should erode and kill ISIS. And then I think there's another issue here that, I think David Brooks at AEI has touched on, and something I want people to hear, and that is that we have a military aim against ISIS and radical groups just like them, but there's also a battle of the ideas that are out there. How do we see 2 young people from Southfield, Mississippi decide to try to fly into Syria and join ISIS? ISIS offers people, they are lying, murdering, they're the worst, offers people a sense of friends, family, and a trip to paradise. And then we see people from Mississippi, we see doctors, we see highly educated people wanting to go there. Why is that? Well, because I think in some respects, Western civilization today honors unfettered freedom. Well, do whatever you want. I have 2 15-year-old daughters, and you can imagine how I feel about unfettered freedom. But also, and this is important, I know we don't ever hear about this, I really want to say this today, but we also just want to be happy. Human beings don't find happiness through unfettered freedom or the search for happiness. Human beings find happiness through living a life greater than themselves, being a cause of justice and healing and peace. And when we search for that in our own ways, that's where we find meaning. And so today in the country, we see people that gravitate towards drugs, they gravitate towards gangs, and horrifically, they gravitate towards radical groups. So I think the West has to come to grips with this, that we do need to have guardrails. We do need to make sure that people understand that the trip to paradise does not rest in blowing up innocent people in a mall, a shopping center, or on in a village in Syria. And so, to me, it's a military effort, clearly, which is why we need to have our capability. And secondly, it also involves a battle of ideas about who we are and about what all of our responsibilities are. It's not somebody else, it's not the government, it's we the people. Values matter. Purpose matters in life. And so I think we have to keep that in mind.
I want to turn to the audience, but I have 2 things I want to ask you about really quickly. I want to press you to give me a kind of a pretty tough answer. Iran, what would you do about the current Iran deal that the president has signed?
Whatever the Republicans are doing, and now growing number of Democrats. I mean, first of all, I wouldn't have done it. I think we were in search of an agreement no matter what it took. I mean, my concern is that what it does is it restores strength in the Iranian economy, which gives them the resources to support the very groups that we may end up fighting someday. And some of the groups have already fought us, Hezbollah in what they did to our barracks in Beirut just to get started. So I'm hoping the Senate, hope against hope, will reject this thing and the sanctions would stay on.
And if it doesn't, which I think it will.
Then I think we have to watch every step of the way. If we see one cross T or dot I out of place, if we have to do it on our own, I would put unilateral sanctions on from the U.S. And if we're threatened, If our security or the security of Israel is threatened, that's a whole new ballgame. But in the process, you know, if we slap on sanctions on them, then, you know, it's not so simple for somebody in another country that wants to deal with Iran. You get a French oil trader wanting to sell in Iran and not sell in America. So, again, this is back to leadership. So we're watching all these things happen in Europe right now, with the migrants, right, leaving and trying to flooding their way into these countries. There's such common purpose between us and our allies, and somehow we allow this to slide. And I think it's you know what I think part of it is, and I don't like to spend my time criticizing presidents, but I think the president does not support American exceptionalism. And some of his folks have said we need to lead from behind. I've never seen anybody lead from behind.
You've got a sympathetic audience on that.
Well, the Lions used to. I said used to. I'm not even getting into the University of Michigan.
Okay. I'm going to try and represent some of your questions. We're already talking about some of the Iran issues that I see a lot of our audience members.
But let me ask you a little bit more about Iran. And the other problem is they get a ballistic missile in 5 years. I mean, the whole thing is, you know, I went through a process. Let me tell you, for 10 years of my life, I fought to balance the federal budget. 10 years. I wrote my own budgets. I got slaughtered most of the time on them. I attracted more and more people over time. We got to the precipice of being able to get one, and the Clinton administration made up the numbers. Some people wanted to make a deal, and I said, I shut the government down first, which we did. And then guess what? We reopened it, they understood we were serious, and we actually got a real agreement. When you are so hungry to get an agreement, that's when you better watch what you're doing. Whether it's selling your house or buying a car. These things are, again, the principles are pretty darn simple, and they went too far. And every time they ran into a roadblock, they just erased it. That's not how you make an agreement on anything.
So, here's a question from the audience, which actually is a little bit more general, but it does go to some of the challenges that face us. So we're confronted by a Russia which is growing more aggressive. We're confronted by a variety of other challenges that you and I have talked about here today. What are the tools that are available to us between war and sanctions, between war and freezing bank accounts? Good question.
Well, I mean, you know, in the Ukraine, we don't have a lot of time to be philosophical. I think we ought to be arming them with the weapons so they can defend themselves.
Defensive weapons only or offensive weapons too?
Well, I mean, I think right now you can send them defensive weapons. It also gives them the ability of intelligence. I mean, there's a whole list of things we can send them, and maybe sometimes you can define them both ways.
I'm interested by your position on Ukraine because when I was on Capitol Hill, you opposed the notion that we should do anything to help the people of Kosovo. You wrote a piece in the New York Times about it.
Well, that was a civil war, and I'm very reluctant to get the U.S. involved in the civil war. You know, I opposed U.S. troops in Lebanon because, and I was one of about 14 Republicans as a very young congressman. I felt that being in the middle of the civil war would not work out. I don't see the Ukraine as a civil war unless you think Ukraine is part of Russia, which I don't think. What about it there, didn't I? What I'm saying is, I see the incursion the invasion by Russia is not only an invasion, but also a dangerous precedent as it relates to the rest of NATO, which, you know, we've now talked about the Baltics, whatever. So I would give them obviously the defensive capability to defend themselves. In terms of what are the other opportunities, I mean, I look at foreign policy as both economic, I look at it as, of course, defense and intelligence, but there's another element, and when I talk about economic, not only a strong economy, but also the ability to be able to have influences in other countries that could be related to things like trade. Okay, so as we strengthen a country, as we work with them more carefully, it gives them the ability to be stronger and to be able to resist the kind of problems that they can see down the road. But I think, so So, you know, it's also part of an agreement, right? There's also agreements we make. NATO says an attack on one is an attack on all of us. I mean, that sends a very strong message. I also think that when we think about foreign policy, not only should we have the military involved in, of course, in looking at how we project and what's going on the ground, and not only the diplomats, but I think also business leaders. You know, I met with the CEO of Exxon, and I swear he knows more about Putin than all the people in the State Department combined. So I think we need to be in a position where our business leaders can talk to us about what's on the ground, recognizing that they have their biases, they have their concerns, and we've got to separate those things. You know, a whole lot of being a leader is like being the governor of Ohio. Lots of people come in and tell you lots of things. It's the ability to look through what's being presented, both with good advisors, because I always have a lot of people around, both with good advisors, and frankly, to some degree, good instincts. The ability to determine what you think the truth is, what's the nub of it. That's why having experiences in executive matters so much. I mean, as a congressman, I had some. But, you know, the difference between being a member of the legislature and being a governor is not that big a difference. If you know, no more difference than day and night. And so I think, you know, the ability to make a decision and execute is really, really important. And I have people that will come to my office today, just like I did to Congress, and say, you can't do that. Well, that's my job, is to judge. And here's the other thing, not worry about politics. You're going to worry about politics and figure the political considerations in the middle of all this. I went down to, I think it was one of the southern states, I can't remember, and they said, well, would you close our base down? Because, you know, our base is really important. I said, well, maybe. Because what we can't afford to do is to have unneeded infrastructure at the sake of putting money into sort of like weapon systems. You ever notice with weapon systems, they put the windshield wipers in Montana, and the wheels in Connecticut, and the bodies out in California, they spread them out. You know, that's what they do, and then that's why it gets so hard with the different constituencies. But where we are today, in terms of the dire need for a stronger defense, we cannot let these sort of parochial considerations weigh into what we have to do, realizing that they always will.
Understanding that is going to always be true. And a good question about the influx of refugees and immigrants into Europe. This is something we're seeing on the TV every day. We're seeing 70 people found in a truck in Austria suffocated to death. Is this a problem that is going to face us? Is it going to be a challenge to us? And is there an extremist element as well in these refugee problems that could have a real impact, as we saw in the train attack last week in France?
Well, first of all, you know, for our country, we obviously have to protect our border. We have to finish the fence so we know who comes in and out. I mean, don't just let don't let people walk in and out of your house. You know, the immigration question here is bigger, just quickly. I mean, I think get the wall done. Anybody wants to come over after that and go back, no questions asked. A policy that allows people a guest worker program where they can go in, come in and work, then go back, and then with the 12 million, if not, those who violated the law should be punished, either prison or deported. And for those that have been law-abiding, I think, you know, there's a path to legalization over time. In terms of the migrant crisis in Europe, I mean, I don't know if you saw it today, but somebody going across, I can't remember, there was a mom and dad and two little kids squeezing under the wire. On the Hungarian border. I can't remember where it was. But when I saw it, I saw the two little kids. You know, that's what strikes you first off. Trying to get someplace where they can escape landmines and war, the civil war in Syria. You know, frankly, that thing should have been solved. Long ago. But so what I'm saying is these are people fleeing, and I think that the Europeans are going to realize that they're going to have to control their borders as well. And I think we need to look at that as an opportunity to build relationships, to understand their challenges, to see how we can help. You know, when Europe was experiencing, the EU is experiencing the Greek crisis, what did we ever say about that? I don't remember us saying anything. We stood with nobody. Now, interestingly enough, the Greek crisis has largely been, at least they've stepped up and have changed. And the guy that was leading the opposition, the prime minister there, he turned around and switched 180, and he's doing just fine. We got Greeks here in the front row. I mean, it's interesting how they finally got their act together. Maybe they got a couple calls from Uncle Pete, I don't know. But the bottom line is, look, they're very worried because of the lack of assimilation. I just read a giant article about the Benelux in France and the lack of assimilation. I mean, it is absolutely it's probably a crisis proportions. So I have a magic answer to all this. I tell you what I will tell you is, you ever notice when people run for president, they make promises and they never keep them? It's because they make an awful lot of promises that can't be kept or that are not realistic, and I'm not going to do that. I don't have the answer, but I would tell you that these countries are going to have to protect more about who gets in there. And they've got to drive assimilation, and they've got to have rules. The French were playing hands-off, and it isn't working. And now you can see the French politics beginning to move to the right, in some respects, to the far right.
Absolutely. One of the things you said is you were seeing people crawling under wire with their children, without mothers, children, you're victims of rape, of attack, fear of mines, and everything else. And the source of this is all the turmoil in the Middle East and North Africa. It's Libya, it's what we're seeing in the Horn of Africa as well, it's what we're seeing in Syria, but also in Yemen and Iran. So then the question becomes, you don't want a nation build. What do we do? What do we do about this challenge?
Well, there are people that we can support. I mean, we should be supporting the Kurds for sure. I mean, the Kurds are a source of strength. Well, I mean, perhaps they should be armed. Again, I don't want to be, you say perhaps, I say perhaps, so that somebody doesn't say, oh, well, this is exactly what he means, because these are complicated issues. But we don't want the Kurds to be made victims, and I think they need to have the ability to defend themselves. But we need to pick this because, look, just because we don't directly intervene doesn't mean we don't have people we can help. I think in the early stages of Syria, we had people that we could have helped. And, I talked to these folks in the administration, and I said, what's your policy? They said, in Iraq, we're training people. I said, well, after that fails after 100 years, then what are you going to do as the situation further deteriorates? So, look, I mean, we had a red line in Syria. It sowed confusion in everybody's minds, right? We didn't know what America stood for. We're making a very poor deal with Iran. The Prime Minister of Israel comes to the U.S., and the President doesn't want to meet with him. What I think we should be doing, I think we need to be clear. If you draw a red line, you keep it. Don't draw the red line if you do not mean it. That's why I try not to draw red lines in the middle of a campaign, because I want to make sure that what I tell you I can do, or at least if I can't do it, it wasn't because I made something promise that was unrealistic. I will tell you this, we can balance the federal budget and build a strong defense and have a stronger economy in the United States of America. I've been involved in it, it happened before, and it will happen again. That is not some false promise we can do that. In terms of the Middle East, Israel's our ally. If we got problems with them, let's talk in the back room. We don't need to have 15 cameras out here watching our conversation. If a prime minister comes from Israel, I'm going to have a cup of coffee with them every day of the week. Okay? No more shutting them out. The Saudis, fundamentally, we've got a lot in common with them. No more hand-holding. Shut your madrasas down. We don't need you to be radicalizing people in this world, which is what you're doing. At the same time, don't throw the relationship out. You saw today where UAE's actually sent people to fight the Houthis over in Yemen because they fear the encroachment of Iran against the Saudis. That means we have a lot we can do in common. The Egyptians, we don't like what they did with this trial. We're not going to cut off military aid. I'm glad the president restored military aid to Egypt. Part of Egypt's problems is economic growth. They're never been able to grow. Too much corruption in the government. Are there things that we can do through foreign aid? Absolutely, there are things that we can do to encourage them. First of all, our big chunk of our foreign aid operations are corporate welfare. We have the Agency for International Development that was supposed to take a country from developing to developed. And I don't think one country has ever gone from developing to developed in the history of the organization. But foreign aid can matter if applied appropriately. With Iran, I've told you what I feel about Iran, and in Iraq I would support the Kurds, but I would not get in the middle of a civil war in Iraq. I just think it is not where I would put our sons and daughters are.
Even understanding that the civil war in Iran, the fight between the Sunni and the Shia is what's created the space for ISIS to rise up.
It's always, no. I don't think it's just that. I think there's a lot of fertile ground, and there are things we can do to degrade ISIS. We can destroy them, and we need to win the battle of ideas. And I'll tell you, as the President of the United States, Muslims, Christians, Jews, Hindus, all the leaders of the great faiths of this world, where are they today? What message are they sending to people about the trip to paradise is blowing up innocent people in a market somewhere? I mean, it's a battle of ideas. At the same time, it's also the need for a military victory. I'll tell you, it's interesting. This is removed from that. But isn't it interesting that North Korea caved because of loudspeakers in the South broadcasting messages to the North to disrupt? Isn't that interesting? Whatever happened to the voice of America? Whatever happened to the voice of the civilized world? It's not that hard to pull that together. We need to do it.
We don't talk enough about South America, about Latin America. When we talk about it, it's always in the context of immigration. But what we're seeing is a real leftward lurch in South America. Obviously, Venezuela is
Venezuela, terrible.
Colombia, Argentina.
Yeah, Argentina and Brazil. I mean, look, it's been the leadership there. It's been the top leaders.
Should we care? Do we care?
Of course we have to care. It's in our hemisphere, and they're big countries. But it's a leadership crisis now in both of those countries. Kirchner is she's just a terrible leader. We're going to have to see what happens there. De Silva, for a while in Brazil, left, but a little bit stable. And Rosette now is just doing a terrible job there. But you look on the bright side, you look at a place like Colombia, where you saw great bravery right on the last president. I'll mention a country nobody talks about, Uruguay, where people begin to think that that's the place where we can do trade. So, in Mexico, I read a book one time about superpowers of the late 21st century, and one of these experts put Mexico there. When you think about the resources, the youth, the capability, it's corruption that has dogged them, and there's a case where we need to protect our border, but perhaps there's some things that we can do. We can send people, like Bill Broughton or Rudy Giuliani down to those places and help them to build a civilized, rule of law situation. You mentioned Africa for a second. I've been in the Congo. I've been in Angola. I've also been in Rwanda, and I went to Rwanda. And the president is not new anymore. The president of Rwanda is a free market guy. Does he have his challenges and problems? People condemn him, but frankly, that guy, he's done a fantastic job in Rwanda. The possibility for soft aid to Africa is there if we would use it to actually bring, and George W. Bush did some of it. I was involved with the great rock star Bono in terms of debt relief, soft aid. These things can work and can have an impact. And the way I see it is when we actually get things to the people, vaccinations, clean water, nets to fight off the disease caused by mosquitoes, then when they see a military aircraft from the United States flying over their village and the men are shaking their fists, the women said, yeah, but they saved my kid's life. Those are the kind of soft things that I think can make a big difference in the world, or make a difference in the world. So all this is a, the other thing we have to think about sometimes is when, I always like to think that when we see a terrible tragedy, when we see children die in another part of the world, we've all lost a little bit of ourselves. And when people do better in other parts of the world, we're stronger as a civilization. So we have to think about all the tools in the toolbox that can help us to lead. But it goes without saying, if we don't lead, who's going to? If we lead from the behind, who's going to lead? So that's why it's important that we have the economic capability, the intelligence capability, the military capability, and a strong, god-darn economy, where people have jobs and hope, and with that comes greater strength.
You've just done a very nice job of it, but we're about to run out of time. If you want to take a couple minutes and just sort of
Well,
summarize.
you're from Australia, and it's one of the great majors that we have in tennis today. 150 degrees down there when they play. Look, I mean, I guess what I would say, just what I finished, and that is with strong economy, balance your budget, deregulate, look at a way to help corporations to invest in plant equipment so the workers can have higher productivity and thus higher wages. Don't get caught up in congressional parlor games where we can't figure out how to balance the budget, so we put these phony barriers in, like the sequester, that threatens to undermine the ability to build a strong defense. They should be rejected. We should get on a path to balancing the budget. We need to reform the Pentagon. Bob Gates started it. Much, much more can be done. But we need to have systems that can project lethality and mobility. And then I think at the same time, we need a rebuilding of our intelligence capability, which we've seen eroded over a long period of time. Our diplomacy should be accompanied by business leaders and our military leaders that actually decide in quadrants of the world exactly how we should carry out policy. And then I think we have to remember that at our base is a Jewish and Christian ethic. We believe in human rights. We believe in the power of the individual. We're in a special place, America. We shouldn't forget it. We are a special country. But we're not just there because we happen to live here. We're a special country because of the way we conduct ourselves. And I think being able to have the flame brighter in the hearts of all of our people, and our children, and our grandchildren, to realize that as an individual, you have a responsibility. For me, as a Christian to the Creator, for a humanist to mankind, we'll be okay. Restore our confidence in our way. I think we'll be okay. And you're very good